Are we ready to let the games begin? Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Dave, thanks for coming. You've been great. Hina, you've been greater. Sorry, I'm a little biased here. Sorry, a little biased.
You're presupposing a standard.
Right.
Yeah.
My question is that you mentioned all of your arguments about this personal God and about your God, the Christian God, but I'm thinking, and I'll speak and then I'll ask a question, that you can be a Muslim, you can be a Hindu, you can be a Krishna, you could be a Christian, believe in Krishna, you can believe in Raelians, and all have the same arguments that you're talking about, the theological argument, the fine-tuning, the universe argument, the Kalam argument. All of these things, you could be any other religion and say exactly the same thing. And that makes me think that, well, your argument isn't that great if all the others have exactly the same thing. Doesn't it cast doubt on you speaking a Christian viewpoint that can also be argued from any other religion?
Well, our topic is, does God exist? So, yes, a Muslim
And
could...
I have to go to the camera, so just...
Go ahead. I'll pretend you're still there. And then... Yes, the topic is, does God exist? And Hina and I were discussing a topic, and, should we talk about Islam? Should we talk about Christianity? We decided we'd talk about kind of a generic theism. So, yes, me personally, I believe God is a Trinity, and that we would know that Christianity is true by Jesus' resurrection from the dead and things like that. But yes, most of what I've said tonight could be, a Jew or a Muslim would be perfectly happy with.
And I will just add that actually was what started my path of doubt. I went from a Muslim to a generic theist to a deist to what I am now. So.
Thank you. And David, you were greater than great. David Akbar. I appreciate
David Akbar.
My question is this. You said that you had an internal, subjective searching, and that is why you left Islam. You started searching within yourself. Can you give any non-subjective, personal reasons why you considered the God of Islam not the true God? And have you done this with the Judeo-Christian God, where it's not just a personal, subjective reason for your objections?
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Was there any valid, truthful, objective reasons for rejecting theism?
I thought that's what this debate was about. I thought I gave my reasons.
They seem to be more personal than...
And I believe that the reasons given by David for belief are also quite personal. So to single my arguments out as particularly personal, I think is sort of unfair. But I guess to get to your question, I mean, I can't look around at the universe and say that there's some good God that made all of this. There's no way. And that this God can abide by a different moral standard than the standard that it created for us. And this idea that, people can be punished eternally for reasons that seem rather random and have nothing to do with being good or bad. There are a lot of reasons why. There's no one single reason. But I think it is objectively the one objective thing I can say is that I'm pretty sure that if I weren't raised in a society that taught me to believe in a deity, that I would believe in that deity. So that is the one thing that made me really lose my belief in God, is that if I hadn't been taught that belief, I wouldn't have come up with it myself.
Anything to add?
Not too many people historically, just by, sitting around thinking, came to the conclusion of atheism. And so that would also seem to be, if you're going to say, well, I wouldn't have come to that conclusion on my own, well, most people historically didn't come to the conclusion of atheism. So I would wonder why you now take the position of atheism when that's a position.
Well, because you exist. The theists exist, so an atheist has to exist in order to not believe in that God. I mean, that's why.
A couple of quick things. One is, I don't know whether Bruce has announced, but several of us are going out to meet Marie Callender's up the street. Afterwards. Norms. Sorry, I always screw things up. Okay, at Norms. And so I would really urge for future speakers I don't want to hear about grilled cheese sandwiches at this point. You know,
Them's fighting words where I come from.
Okay. Now, one of the other things that bothered me in this entire debate was that no one defined terms. You said there's a God, all right? And people wandered over, well, probably that God is omniscient and omnipotent. We never really got to omnibenevolent because that's really hard to justify. So I would challenge both of you just to spend, 1 minute. What is this God that you believe in or don't believe in?
My answer is very simple. I'm sure yours is a little bit longer. God is a supernatural explanation for natural phenomena that have natural explanations, and that's what I reject. So to me, that includes, spirituality and all that stuff too. But I think you have more to say on this.
Well, yeah, there's certain things that can't be explained naturally. If you don't have nature, then you can't explain something naturally. So when at the beginning of the universe, when nature comes into existence, you can't explain that naturally, because then you'd be appealing to nature to sort of pull itself up by its own bootstraps. But yes, if we're in a debate, there's only so much we can cover in a debate with a 15-minute opening statement.
Right, but if God exists, it seems to me that one would want to define one's term as to what God means to you.
Well, yeah, and again, I believe God is a Trinity, that the second person entered creation as Jesus of Nazareth, and all of these things. But if we're talking about just God, we kind of have, and Hina didn't want to get specific on Christianity, so we just debated the existence of God. But given that there's only so much, if you end up with an omnipotent mind that is the ground of logic and morality and so on, if that's not God, I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you mean. It's like saying, well, I mean, keep in mind, no matter how much evidence we give for the existence of God, you could always say, well, maybe slightly different in some way. Well, guess what? If any of those views is correct, naturalism is false and atheism is false. So, it's like we're saying, here are all my reasons for believing in God, and you say, but you could be off on one of those things and it could be different. Well, regardless, you're wrong. You know what I mean? So it's in other words, here's what you have. For most people, the live options, what William James referred to as the live options, the things that we still consider on the table as far as worldviews. For most people, it's theism or naturalism, living in the West. So anytime we're discussing, those are the issues that are going to be on the table. Some sort of theism or a naturalism. And the other things, you can say, well, Zeus, but it's not exactly what we're talking about.
So your arguments are equally valid tonight for the existence of Zeus, or
I'm saying if we debate the existence of God, and there's enough evidence to show that naturalism is false and that a creator of the universe who's omnipotent and so on, and is the ground of logical laws and morality.
First, you're going to say God exists, and next,
if we're talking about specifics, yes, absolutely. If we're talking about is Christianity true, or something like that, then yes, I would argue for that Christianity is true. So. Yes, I believe more than we have discussed tonight. My beliefs are much more specific on a lot of issues than what we've discussed right now.
And I will say, to go back to that other question, nothing makes theists agree more than the presence of an atheist.
Next question. Okay. I'd like to ask one on each side. Some might say, from the atheist standpoint, that a number of the statements that you've made seem to bear some sort of subjectivity to them. So I'd like to ask you, what's the most objective thing that you could say in favor of your view?
I don't see a lot of subjectivity in most of what I've said. When I say that the universe had a beginning, that's not, this is my personal feeling or something like that. It's not what I'm saying. Or when I say that, the cosmological constant is finely tuned to 1 in 10 to the 120th power, that's not something I'm saying. I kind of feel like that's. I don't feel like that. I don't. I mean, I could say I feel like, wow, this universe is really amazing. I can have that sort of subjective experience. But when we're talking about, those are factual statements. Those are factual statements. Now, what you could say is a kind of subjective part is, our interpretation still plays a role. We have facts, but we also have to interpret those facts, and so there is a degree of personal interpretation. But and I understand people see things differently, but I personally I don't see any other way to go on a lot of the issues.
Response to that?
A response to that. Well, I feel like the interpretation thing is at the heart of what my argument is, essentially, that we're fallible human beings with our fallible interpretations, and one of those interpretations is theism, which you can find evidence for if you're really looking for it, I guess, but I don't think necessarily that the evidence on its own leads to that conclusion.
Okay, and now the question on this side. Rather than discussing things having to do with optimality or suboptimality of systems, or whether or not the fall could explain a lot of the things that you were mentioning, let me ask you just one question and a follow-up. Do you believe that information is material?
I'm not sure how to answer that question, because information only exists as we materially talk about it, think about it, transmit it, and there's material behind that. Again, I think it's a tree falling in the forest, no one's there to hear it question. I think it's sort of an empty question. Does it exist without us? Without us to think it, would it exist? I mean, if we were to decimate or eliminate the entire human population, what would information even be? Or I should say the living population, because animals also have information that they transmit to each other. So yeah, I guess I just don't see the point in that question.
I'm not referring to the means of transmission of the information, but the information itself.
It would not exist without us there to talk about it, think about it, transmit it.
No, I mean, information is quantifiable. You can say, well, we wouldn't know that it's quantifiable if we weren't there. But so, DNA, if there were no human beings, DNA is still coded information, right? It's a set of instructions for proteins, for putting together amino acids into proteins. So information is something real. It's not the matter itself. It's kind of the arrangement of matter, if it has some sort of meaningful, some sort of meaningful pattern. And yeah, again, something like DNA has it's coded information. If all human beings die tomorrow, there's still information on this laptop it's an arrangement. It's an arrangement of matter.
There are things that are meaningful to certain perceptions and not meaningful to others. So again, I don't really know why we would bother with information that's just lying there with no one there to interpret it. It's kind of there.
From the short lady.
Jump. One word at a time.
So I apologize. I came in a little late. I missed all of your introduction. I think.
Oh, it was awesome.
It was so sorry.
I thought pride was a sin.
I missed the best part.
It was the best moment ever.
But I did come in, I think, about halfway through yours, and something struck me in something that you said. You were talking about not necessarily needing to know everything about how your computer worked, or about the guy that made the thing that landed on Mars. And that we didn't necessarily need to know that. We just needed to be able to use our computer or our smartphone. Do you remember saying that?
That I think is a mischaracterization of what I said. Okay. I'm just saying that we don't know. There's no way that all of us can know everything.
Okay, and that's true. But somebody does know those things. The guy that made our smartphone knows it.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy that made the device that landed on Mars knows it.
Right.
Because somebody designed those things.
Right.
And who made the universe knows the universe, right? Because
I reject the premise that someone made it.
But I understand that you reject that premise. But what I'm saying is that the other things that you were talking about have a design to them. And what I don't understand is why everything else in the universe has a design. Everything else that you're talking about has a design. But you reject the premise that the most incredibly designed thing that there is doesn't have a design.
So you're starting with the premise that it's incredibly designed, which I spent this entire debate addressing and expressing my reasons for not believing in. If you can't accept those reasons, then I'm afraid we're at an impasse. But the reason I brought up technology was not to say that it's just like the universe and that it's designed, but more to say that there are things that we don't understand and we're comfortable with them. And that just because you don't understand human evolution or astrobiology or astrophysics or any of those things doesn't mean that you have to shoehorn in an explanation that you do understand, which is a deity. So that's the point I was trying to make, not that the universe was designed. And again, I spent this entire debate making my points about that. I don't know if I can rehash them all in the Q&A.
No, I'm not asking you to rehash them, but what I'm saying is that we are more designed than a computer.
I disagree with that premise. Again,
I think a computer has more design than we do.
It has human design that we can trace, that we can look at. Human beings evolved through a process of natural selection that I can prove to you with biological evidence. It's not someone sitting down and making a person. There's no evidence of that. There is evidence of my smartphone was made by a slave in China. But, there's no evidence that someone sat down and shaped a person. There's no evidence of that. There's evidence of natural selection, which can be explained naturalistically.
Okay. And David, how would you speak to that?
I would disagree that life doesn't need a designer. Granting everything that Hina just said about natural selection, selecting, traits and so on, for evolution even to get started, for the process even to begin, you need something very specific. You need life, and it needs to be of a very particular sort. It needs to, when it just happens to come into existence, it has the ability already to make copies of itself, right? So it's not just something that has a metabolism, it's something that also has the ability to make copies of itself. They can't be exact copies, or there'd be no variation. There'd be no variation for natural selection to act on. But they can't be extremely different, because if they're extremely different, it wouldn't preserve the beneficial traits. So at the very beginning of the process, you need something very specific. And when you get down into what would be required to have that sort of thing, the simplest known life. The simplest life that we know about is a bacterium in the urinary tract, and it has about 400 medium length. If you're on average, about 400 medium length proteins, and given the amount of time that you've had in the universe. So you can actually calculate the number of possible interactions since the beginning of the universe. You can say, here's the number of seconds since the beginning of the universe, here are the number of particles in the universe, and here is the fastest rate of interactions of particles. So you set the speed of light as a limit to how fast things can move. Total number of particles, total number of seconds since the beginning of the universe, and you don't get anywhere near the time required to produce one protein by chance, not one. And so the idea that you could get enough to create an entire living organism all in the same place at the same time, and then it gets bound together and then goes on, I would say this isn't just, there's no reason to think that there's a designer required here, because that most basic living organism is like a little city, and I would agree with you that it's much more shocking than a laptop.
David, that's why we need the multiverse theory.
But I love multiverse theory, because anytime someone goes multiverse, well, I get to do that too, right? So anytime if we're talking about optimal design, or I don't like the way that's designed, maybe God designed an infinite array of universes, and ours is just one, and he selected that way of doing ours, and selected.
God, what a sadist! What a sadist to do that. Jeez. But I have to point out that nobody is claiming that life just emerged. There were you talked about the urinary tract organism. That's not the simplest form of life we know about. There are evidence for even more simpler forms of life.
What?
There were prototypes to that, which were essentially just strands of DNA. Like, I'm not a biologist, so I'm not going to necessarily, say I know everything about this. I'm comfortable with uncertainty and not knowing everything. But yeah, the idea that, I'm proposing that, proteins just randomly bound together out of nowhere is not.
Well, no, you have the simplest known life, which has about
that's alive right now.
Yeah, but they, I know, but no,
yeah.
No, let me finish.
You've had a lot of time.
They do knockout experiments where they say, what could something survive without? And you still get down to about 250 proteins that you need for any sort of thing that would qualify as life. There's not just
before that there was prototypes of that via there is evidence for this. And again, I'm not a biologist.
I'm saying we agree on things and disagree on things, but there's not on that one.
Okay.
In your first rebuttal, you mentioned there is no such thing as a mental state. You said there's a physical state, and that a mental state is strictly a phenomena of a predictable mental state. I want to know, did I hear you correctly?
It's more that a physical
there cannot be a mental state in and of itself.
It has a physical. It is a physical thing, is what I'm saying. This idea, I don't agree with dualism. There's not a mind and a body. The mental state you're experiencing is a physical state.
Okay, which then would suggest that all emotional experience can be predicted from physical indicators. You would believe that?
I don't have to believe that.
You think that's true?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'd like for you to explain the mechanism, not behind attraction, not behind arousal, but the physical and physiological phenomena that occurs and can be observed in the mental state of love.
Serotonin, oxytocin, probably some chemicals I forget because I'm not a biologist.
Okay. If that were true, we could predict who would fall in love and be in love with another human being, because you're suggesting how much serotonin, how much dopamine, how much epinephrine, how much caffeine, how much oxytocin. I don't think that's correct. So what's your definition of love if not a mental state?
It's a mental state that is physical. A mental state is a physical state. And I think you're misunderstanding. You're talking about very complex socio-biological phenomena. People fall in love, and you can predict who falls in love with whom. In fact, you can look at the sociological data. You're far more likely to fall in love with someone who's in the same social class as you. There's no magic behind that. It's just who you happen to meet.
Bonding and pairing isn't the same as love.
Right. But
oxytocin is, we're talking about the hormone that's released during lactation and breastfeeding.
In addition to many, many, many other states, yes. Cuddling does it too.
So love is a predictable phenomena, you would
That's
say.
not what I say. What I'm saying is that it's a physical... Okay, so you're proposing...
It's a mechanistic... You basically said it can be predicted with...
I never said it can be predicted.
Phenomena.
So let me explain myself again in case this is unclear.
Sure.
A mental state is a physical state. One has feelings, and those feelings are shown in brain scans. And what I'm saying is that a mental state is not a separate thing. It is part of your physical being. Your brain is part of your body. And so to talk about love is to talk about a very complex thing. What kind of love? Falling in love versus experiencing feelings of love, those are all separate things. But that isn't to say that I can predict who's going to fall in love with who. I'm not God, if we're going to make a joke here. I'm not anybody. But the bottom line is that a mental state is a physical state. You can measure that thing that's happening in your brain as you feel love. Prediction, that's beyond me. That's beyond anyone, if we're being honest here, right?
Yeah, I agree with Hina on a lot of what she said. The view she's defending is called identity theory. Mental states are identical with physical states. It's one of the leading views. And not being able to predict something we can't exactly predict the weather, all kinds of things. That doesn't mean that things don't have a physical basis. So the real question is, once you have, because we know among the things we know that there is obviously a close relationship between physical states and mental states with things like pain. You can actually do brain scans and so on. So the question is there anything left over? And so the person who's making the argument for a kind of dualism has to, that would have to show that there are certain properties of mental states that cannot be described in physical terms. That's how you would do that. But as far as something like love goes, maybe I tell my wife tonight I serotonin and dopamine her very, very much.
Hey, thanks. I'm glad to be a guest here tonight, and I wanted to thank all the hosting different people. It's my first time at one of these debates, so I didn't really know what to expect. So I don't want to be critical. but
I know I'm ugly. Okay, say it. Okay, you don't have to.
First of all, let me say that I'm definitely a skeptic, but I'm also definitely a Christian. And I think those two things aren't incompatible. I don't know how other people feel about that, but that's okay. I was going to say, just constructively, and boy, well, first of all, I really liked hearing both of you, and I feel like I could spend time eating and talking with you guys individually for hours about various things. I don't know everything there is to know, and I don't. I feel like I'd like to, though. I'd like to understand all the processes and how laptops work and whatnot. A constructive thing in future debates, I would think that maybe it'd be good to have sources ready to cite, because people like to hear why something is authoritative or what research has been done. Point to an article.
Question, please.
I'm sorry. My question is this. It seems that, because I had a lot of other questions too, but anyway, you're both starting with the presupposition, it seems, that the point of life is efficiency, survival, not death. And I wonder if we supposed that the point of life, the point of being created, was to glorify God, or any other reason, and that would, strangely be through death and misery and other things, and mysteries to us, would your arguments change? Would you argue differently if you weren't supposing efficiency was the ultimate goal? So.
I think there's a conflation of point, meaning, goal, and just what evolution does. I wouldn't say that the point of life is to reproduce and stay alive. I would say that's what life does. That's what evolution leads to. As far as a point or meaning or anything in life, I don't think I could tell you what yours should be. I don't think anyone can tell anyone else what they should be. And even people within the same religion, fight over what the point is, what's the most important thing. But if I could just speak personally for a moment here and step away from objectivity, I don't think it's efficiency. I don't think it's spreading my genes. Otherwise, I would have had like 10 kids by now. I think the point for me is really to spread, to reduce harm where I see it, and to spread whatever good I can. And I can't say that I'm doing the best job at it, but I'm trying, and I'm pretty certain that I am doing a halfway decent job of it in certain areas of my life.
I agree with you. I agree with you completely. That I don't believe that efficiency or even survival are the most important things. The most important things in life, and that once you have an idea, this is what's most important in life. That can change a lot of interpretations. As far as the discussion tonight goes, it's the idea of efficiency and survival, and why doesn't God help survival more and reproduction more? These are exactly the sorts of values that if you take naturalism seriously, you say these are the sorts of things that would be wired into us, the way bird is wired to build a nest or something like that. We would be wired to survive and reproduce, and so our values would center around those things. And that since we know where those values come from, those aren't the sorts of things that you can then say, but those are the things that God must make the center of his purposes and so on. But that's what atheists generally tend to do. It's here's what's important to us, which if we follow our beliefs through to the logical conclusion, these are just the things that, according to our worldview, we would, expect to make central, and then applying them to God as if they're objective. And as Hina's pointed out, she doesn't believe in objective morality, and so what sense does it make to apply these things to God? But we just can't get away from it. We can't get away from thinking in terms of their sort of absolute right and wrong. And the point is that the absolutes don't fit with one worldview that's on the table.
Well, I mean, y'all are the ones who call God good. I mean, you're proposing relativism by saying one morality applies to God and one applies to people. So I would say that that's the case there, too.
No, if we defined good in terms of, and I've never met a Christian who defines good in terms of maximizing our pleasure and comfort and minimizing our pain and struggle. I've never met a person a Christian or theist in general, who defines God that way. So we say God is good, yes, and we're thinking in terms of holiness.
So
good's
a
and things like that.
completely meaningless term, then.
No, it's not a hedonistic term. It's not. It's no coincidence that the first example of an argument from evil that we have on record was Epicurus, who's the father of a kind of hedonism. Once you take pleasure as the highest good, or anything that's associated with it, then of course you're going to run into all sorts of problems if that's how you're defining good and then saying God is good.
I never posited pleasure as the highest good.
No, I'm not. I'm talking
like, how about not spontaneously miscarrying? How about that? Like, I don't think that's that radical to say that that's a good according to your God, as a matter of fact.
Given your worldview, it's very radical.
I'm running with your worldview here when you talk about your God.
If you're talking about my worldview, we're a bunch of sinners, and God can allow all sorts of things because
that's his fault, though, right? Didn't he make you that way?
He made us sinners?
Yeah, that's pretty sick. Yeah. To make you sinners and say, let's torture you now because you're sinners.
I don't think so.
Well, I don't know. It seems pretty sadistic to me, but...
By the way, thank you very much. I appreciate this whole forum. I really, really do. I appreciate the civility. Hina, thank you very much for being here. David. My question is this. It seems as though that we've spent a lot of time on design. We've talked a lot about the fine-tuning of things and what have you. My question is origins. And we could probably spend another 2 or 3 hours here when we talk about origins. But it seems to me, and one of the challenges I have with the atheistic point of view is that it seems when we talk origins, what happens is that the arguments I've had or the discussions I've had with atheists, what gets ushered in is more process. So, for instance, I could say, well, I'm going to go over and get a Betty Crocker cake. I'm going to bake a cake, and my friend is going to bake one from scratch. But the presupposition is, well, it's not really from scratch. Then, boom, there's a cake. I had the eggs, I had the flour, I had the milk, and what have you. So the question is, I'm not sure if I've got a question, but the question is, coming back, to usher back to the beginning, the very beginning, I could say, well, goodness, the first day was this or whatever, but I needed some kind of ingredient to get to that first day. So I guess I'll throw it to you, Hina, first, and David, you could respond there as well. I'm not sure if that's a real articulate question.
I
but
see
I
what
think you know where I'm heading.
I see what you're saying. Where that there has to be something, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the fact that we're relying on analogies like cakes or whatever else, or things like that, just sort of shows the limitations of the human mind in a lot of ways, that we can't conceive of certain things. And again, to go back to my arguments about technology, that wasn't, the point of that was to say that there's a lot of things we don't get. There are a lot of things that certain of us can't get. And there are cosmologists, people who study the origins of the universe, who keep pushing further and further back and figuring out more and more about the origins of the universe. They haven't found God yet, but they found other things. And so I've just sort of made my peace with the fact that that's not where my mind goes, and that the human mind may never fully comprehend that. But I choose not to fixate on that and use that as a basis for my life, and to use other things, I guess.
Well, may I ask, why would you not take the agnostic position rather than the atheistic position?
They're not mutually exclusive. Atheism is to live without theism, to live without the belief in a deity, and that's what I do. Agnosticism is to say that I can't know for certain. I'm an agnostic atheist. I say I'm an atheist so that people don't think I'm open to them preaching at me randomly. Because for some reason people think agnostic means preach to me. And I'm often not in the mood. I have other things to do.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got your point exactly.
Yeah, I'm
but
not sure I articulated it well,
okay.
So that's okay.
So I'll go with what I got here.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But yeah, I've never understood the sort of response that's okay. Here's something. So just use the laptop as an example again. If I want to understand how this laptop came to be, well, I just understand it requires a cause. It requires a designing intelligence. I understand those that it's goal directed, that there's a purpose towards it. It would never cross my mind to say, well, but I can think of a better one, therefore none of that is the case. And earlier Hina pointed out, well, it's because we're not attributing omniscience to the designer. That's not the reason, right? Could Apple design a better one? Yes. Could they design one that's 10 times better? Absolutely. Well, why don't they? Apple, we would, even if we have no clue, right, about cost constraints and so on, we'd say, even if we had no idea what the reasons were, it would still say, well, this obviously has a designing intelligence and a cause and so on, and whatever their reasons for doing things in this way, they must have reasons. So, in other words, if you have a cause that can produce the effect, but you might not understand exactly why it's like that rather than someone else, rather than some other way, I think you still have to say, okay, well, that's a cause that explains the effect. I might not understand, but those are in the realms of reasons. I can't understand your reasons for doing anything, let alone God's reasons for doing everything.
Time enough figuring out my own reasons for things.
So it's weird to say I don't understand the reasons for doing this, therefore nothing of that sort exists, and therefore it's just a big puzzle how we got it. That's my thinking.
And I think it comes back to the human limitation that we have, where we look for patterns and seek order and reason in things that don't necessarily have them. So I think from my perspective, that's what happens with theism, where we're looking for a reason, we're looking for a way to figure out. But that's just the human thing, and it's what makes society so great. It's what makes civilization so great. We figure things out, but I don't know if we really have it figured out there.
Great. Thank you.
We have 5 more minutes for questions. I do see 2 individuals in line, so be mindful of, we have 5 more minutes, because some of our faces of the audience, they look hungry. So 5 more minutes for questions. Go ahead and approach the podium, please.
Hello. My question is for David. David, I just noticed that you didn't say anything biblical from the Bible. Is there a reason for that debate? Because aren't we supposed to witness also to people that don't know the Bible? Like when she was asking about the sinful thing, we all fall short of the glory of God. That's what the answer would be.
I take issue with that, because as a Muslim, I heavily studied your Bible, so I am aware.
Bible? Huh? You read the whole Bible?
Not the entire thing. You haven't read the whole Quran either, or the entire Vedas, or all the Buddhist scriptures that exist, or all the Hindu scriptures that exist. Yet you feel fit to reject them. But I've read a decent chunk of the Bible. I got really bored at the begats, I'm sorry. But I've read enough of the Bible, so please don't condescendingly assume I need to be told. I really don't appreciate that.
Okay.
But you could be referring to the audience in general, right? Yeah. And by the way,
Everybody,
Well,
all
you
fall
looked at,
short
you
of the
looked
glory
at,
of God.
you
yeah.
talked to
Yeah.
me though. You talked to me.
That's Romans 3:23.
Well-
You don't have to agree with it. That's all there is.
yeah.
to it.
Well,
That's me.
we have to agree to a topic, and we have to stick to a topic. And when we're talking about topics, Hina said, "Hey, how about something on Islam?" I said, "I don't think we're going to disagree much on Islam." And then it was, "Well, I don't really. You shouldn't want to talk about Christianity either." And then so, how about the existence of God? And that's something we just agreed with. But if we made an agreement ahead of time, I'm not going to then go on and hey, my main argument for the existence of God now is the resurrection of Jesus. But with your assumption is that's the whole purpose, and you can do kind of one thing at a time. Like if our debate is there a supernatural world? Is there something supernatural? I'd be totally comfortable debating, is there something supernatural? Because it shows that another worldview is false. And, if the competing, there are only so many competitors on the table. So even if you don't, prove the gospel or something like that, it is still meaningful. It is still meaningful to say this other worldview is incoherent and doesn't fit well, and therefore it's false, and therefore people need to pick something that is not part of that worldview. So yeah, but I understand your point. I just think that and I'm going with my own thought processes. I started having lots of doubts about naturalism, and that put other options on the table, and so on. And that's part of the reason I started to seriously consider Christianity.
Right.
So I think people can go stepwise. Yeah. So
Right. And the other one is, if anyone lacks wisdom, let them ask of God. I'm done. Thank you.
Yes, well, I want to thank both of you for
the man in black
for coming. I never trust anybody wearing black. By the way, just really want to thank you for being here. That table there, all of those are free if anybody wants to take something on Common Core. And I think it's been a great evening. You guys have done a wonderful job. So I just want to say thanks for coming.
All right.
One question. Okay.
All right, let's do this.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. I have a quick comment and a quick question.
Sir, I can't understand what you're saying with your accent.
Let me.
He's my friend. I mess with him right now.
I'd rather keep my French accent rather than have a West Virginian accent. Okay, so
can we cut the mics? This guy's very rude and.
We only have 3 minutes, so let me talk. So the quick comment is you talked about the fact that because we have to kill in order to eat, that somehow that would show a nature of God that would not be benevolent and good, right? So my comment is that there is such a thing in the Bible as free moral agency, and also the fact that we sin. And so that's something that's opposed to Islam, where the Bible explains that God created us good, but then we chose freely to walk away from God, and that's when death entered. To answer the question, when you talked about the killing of animals and killing, we have to kill in order to survive and to feed.
I don't have a choice. I can go vegetarian, which I was vegan for a year, and I didn't kill any animals to eat, but I had to kill plants.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a choice unless I want to die, which I don't.
Mm-hmm.
So and you can say, in the Bible it explains because of Adam and Eve and free will and all that. That still doesn't negate my point that we have to eat other living things to survive. That is required for human beings. Unless technology gets great, which I'm hoping for.
Right. And my question, very quickly, I know we're pretty much finished. The question I had was that you basically talked about, that there's basically no objective moral standard and absolutes. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And And then you mentioned basically if David was here with the last person you debated, they would basically not agree on many things, right? But they would disagree if you talk to many things,
Absolutely.
which is true, right?
Uh-huh.
But then wouldn't you agree that there are some moral laws that are objective and universal, such as murdering of a child and raping?
People do that. God told people to do that, so there is subjectivity. I'm not saying that, okay, if I were in any position to say that we ought to have certain objective moral standards, oh yeah, if I were grand dictator of the world, I'd be like, yes, let's not kill and rape kids. That's awful. We should not do that. But when we look at the living morality that exists in the world, the way it is practiced, there is obviously subjectivity, including within the very texts of the religions that allegedly are true. So, you know,
I'm not here to defend. I'm asking you to tell me if you believe there is an objectivity to morality. If there is such a
there is no evidence for an objective morality because no one practices any objective morality. Everyone disagrees. It's all pretty darn subjective for the most part. And there are some things that seem to be relatively, to use a pun, universal, but even then you see exceptions to it being made in the name of morality. So I think that morality in that way is objectively subjective. And I'm in no position to say we ought to have these objective principles, because obviously that's not how it plays out. All I can go with is say, for me personally, I try to look for ways to reduce harm, but I can't say there's an objective morality because it doesn't exist. Tell me where to find it.
Okay.
I hope no one here has a different subjective preference for chopping people's heads off tonight. Because we can't say ISIS is really wrong then, right? You know what I mean?
Oh, come on. I'm the one they would go for first. You're going to play this game?
No. I am higher up on their list.
Oh,
I guarantee
I'm an
you I am higher up on their list.
No. Apostates die before the infidels.
I criticize Muhammad on a daily basis. And
I left Islam. Islamically speaking, you have a chance of heaven. I don't. I actually am supposed to have been killed 8 years ago, 3 years after I first renounced my faith.
No, I commit shirk. That's the unforgivable sin.
But mine is more unforgivable. Apostasy is more forgivable.
Listen, if I were Muslim, I would behead you both. and you know what? And you would be morally wrong.
Wow, thank you very much. Another round of applause for our panelists here.